Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to the channel. In this channel, we discuss the stories of all operators, and today we will be talking about Mlynar. Mlynar is my favorite character in the story. Uh, his theme is basically that he's shown as someone who is shallow, dark, and who has given up on hope, but in actuality, he has a lot of undermined, hidden kindness and goodness in him, which reveals over time slowly throughout the story. So he may seem like a dark character, but he ends up being one of the nicest characters. That's why his event is named an obscure wanderer. Obscure basically just means like a really, undermined and hidden kind of thing. And so Mlynar is my favorite character in the entire story of Arknights. Alright, his introduction is like he's a knight of Kazimierz. Kazimierz is the same country, you could say, from where Maria and Margaret, the Blemishine and Nerl the Radiant Light, they come from. In fact, these two are the niece of Mlynar. And Mlynar is son of the greatest national hero of that nation. Basically, the problem with Kazimierz right now, the nation, is that it's under the control of businessmen, you could say. And these businessmen, they no longer utilize the knights for what they should be. According to Mlynar, knights are supposed to be serving others, sacrificing for others, doing the right thing, bringing hope to others. But that is no longer the case. These businessmen, they only are concerned with money, with their pockets. So they just utilize the knights by throwing them into some grand tournament where they earn money, where everyone watches knights and gets entertained with them fighting. But there's no service or no actual thing happening in there. And Mlynar deeply despises that system, but on the surface, he's still working for that system. He's still just a salaryman working under them. But of course, there's a lot more to it later on. Okay, so basically the story of Mlynar starts in the event Nerl Light event, which is mostly about Nerl the Radiant Light. And what happens in the event is that his niece, both of his niece, they want to enroll into that grand tournament, and by winning they want to qualify as some senior knight, after which they can help others in need with the authority and power they earn. But Mlynar completely disagrees with them. In fact, the same positions of authority and power were offered to Mlynar by the Kazimierz, but he knew that he will just be used for corruption and wrong things, and for not actual knight-like job. And so he disagrees and he says that Nerls are better than Kazimierz. Kazimierz do not deserve the service of Nerls. That's what he says to his niece too. But his niece doesn't listen, and she just wants to enroll and become a part of Kazimierz authorities. And so, since he disagrees with her, he kind of duels her, but he holds back throughout the duel. He doesn't actually stop her, but just tries to test her, you could say. And she wins the duel because he's holding back, and afterwards he lets her be. And so the tournament starts, and during the tournament, some things go west, and there's some armorless union that interferes in the tournament that kidnaps Mlynar's niece. And basically, their goal is to purge all the infected people living in the slums and the ghettos of Kazimierz. And when Mlynar is told about this, that the infected are gonna be killed by the armorless union, initially he shows like he doesn't care. He says that it's the matter of infected and they should deal with it themselves. But in fact, he actually does care, because during that time when the armorless union is about to attack, he goes and sits in their way, and just from seeing him, they all get scared and leave. They do not attack the infected people. And then he visits the leader of armorless union and warns him, and just from that, the leader withdraws all of his forces and leaves. So that's where the event ends, or at least Mlynar's role in the event ends. Afterwards, he takes a vacation and he goes back to look for his family that he lost, the parents of the two young niece. This is where the second event starts, the current event, an obscure wanderer, where most of Mlynar's story is revealed. So this event, you could kind of break it down into three parts to make it easy. The first part is that he's visiting a village. So once he goes to the village, he comes across an old man who is thanking Mlynar for saving him 20 years ago in some war. Basically, what that war was, it was against the rival nation called Lethanin. Lethanin is where Witch King is from. Maybe you will hear about him later in the story. But yeah, it's a rival nation for Kazimirs. Kazimirs and Lethanin are always at war. So when Mlynar, 20 years ago, when he used to be young and chivalrous, he was also fighting against Lethanin. And in there, he came across an old man that wanted to leave the army of Lithanin. He was working under the Witch King as an arts teacher, but he didn't want to serve there, so he wanted to leave, and Mlynar ended up helping him. He took that, and even though they were enemies, he took that old man and brought him here in the outskirts of Kazimirs in some village. He gave him a home over here. And so the old man wanted to thank Mlynar, and Mlynar, being himself, just didn't accept any thanks and just moved on. So while he's moving on the road, he comes across a young girl who is lost and stranded on the road. So he helps her, he escorts her, and this girl is the 5-star unit that is released with the Mlynar Proviso, who is called. Basically, this girl is serving a big company in Kazimirs called Gale Industries. Gale Industries is a bad company. What they do is they exploit the poor people and take as much money they can from the poor people and take their land away for as low money as possible. And right now this girl was sent here by Gale Industries to buy this land on which Mlynar is currently, this village. But what Gale wants from her is to buy this land for as cheap amount as possible, to not let the villagers ask for much money. And so this girl is here for something bad, basically. But she recalls having seen Mlynar in another negotiation a few years ago, also for Gale Industry. Back then, Mlynar was also representing Gale Industry, but for different reasons. And so she was impressed by him and wanted to thank him, but again he keeps moving on. Then what happens is this girl, she reaches the village, and there she comes across the lawyer that was hired by the villagers. It's a free lawyer, they get it through an NGO, and the lawyer just trying to help them. The lawyer is facing this girl Proviso, and he's representing the village, and he's saying that the villagers, they will be in a lot of trouble after leaving their land, so please try to pay them as much as you can. Whereas Proviso is trying to save money for the Gale Industries and is saying that no, we can't pay. And she turns out to be quite outspoken and logical, and the other lawyer couldn't face her and ends up having to sign up the deal where the villagers are paid very less. So basically the villagers are exploited. Later on, this girl admits herself that the job she is doing is not about good or justice. She wanted to become a knight, to become a good person, to serve others. But basically, right now, she's just exploiting the poor people. And so she regrets it. After making the deal, she comes across Mlynar again. And then she recalls that deal in years ago in which she saw Mlynar. Basically, what happened was there was some company that was even worse than Gale Industries called Westland Company, and there was this project for a hospital, and if the Westland Company was going to get the project, it was going to ruin it. It was a bad company. And Mlynar didn't want that to happen, so he represented Gale Industry and won the negotiation and got the project for the Gale Industries. That's how he is kind. He tries to save others, but he doesn't take any credit for it. And the girl recognizes it and gets inspired by it and tells Mlynar that he did this thing for good. But Mlynar doesn't admit it, of course. But she knows that that's the truth. And after being inspired by that, she goes to the lawyer, the opposing lawyer of the villagers, and tells the lawyer that this contract that Gale Industry signed to buy the village land is not legitimate. There are some faults in it. And so he could sue Gale Industry. Just because of that, the villagers get to save their land and it doesn't get sold very cheap against their will to Gale Industries. And there was more to this. If you actually read the story yourself, later on you will realize that Mlynar actually orchestrated it. He stole some documents and did some things, or something like that happened. And you can read the story in more detail for more fun. But I have to keep it as short as possible, and I'm still dragging it out really long. Alright, so the second substage is about a riot. It's on another day that Mlynar kept moving and he came across some slums. In these slums are the infected people of Kazimirs. And what's happening here is the Gale industry, it also has control over these slums. The Gale industry utilizes the poor infected people here as a cheap labor, underpays them a lot, and forces them to work and stuff. And so this cheap labor, one of them is a kind man, a kind worker, an infected person, and he decides that they should all protest peacefully against Gale industry to ask for increased wages. But while he's organizing the protest, the Gale Industries gets a news about it, and what they do is they send some violent infected people that are hired by them. And during the peaceful riots, these violent infected people, they suddenly start wrecking everything up and causing chaos. Because of that, the infected people, the peaceful protesters, they all get a really bad image, and that way the Gale Industries, they get to save their face. And they even forced the poor dude who organized all of this to turn himself in and put all the blame on himself, say that he organized all of this violent protest. And in return, they give him money which he really needs for his family in need. So he ends up agreeing and then ends up turning himself in and taking all the blame on himself for the wrongs of Gale Industries. Mlynar hears about it, and then he goes to the Gale industry, puts a word in with them, and just from that alone, the Gale is forced to release the dude. He is left, and all the charges against him are laid off. And so the dude thanks Mlynar about why Mlynar is saving him. He's just an insignificant infected, but Mlynar even continues to escort him. And he asks Mlynar, isn't Mlynar afraid to be infected by him? And Mlynar doesn't say much in words, but of course we know that he empathizes with the poor and infected people. He just doesn't show that. So while Mlynar is escorting this infected person through the slums, at the same time there's another noble in the same slum. This noble is basically a delegation or a diplomatic person from Lathanin, the neighboring rival nation. He's just here for whatever visiting purpose to build relations between the two rival nations. And while inside these slums, suddenly an explosion takes place. Both the Mlynar and noble are nearby each other and they end up meeting each other. So the noble thinks that Mlynar is the one who caused this and is trying to assassinate the noble, but Mlynar assures him that it's not the case. And they move on. They get back to their places safely. And the noble, he was supposed to go home tomorrow to Lathanin, but just because of this explosion, he gets scared and he tries to rush back by the night. And this is where the last segment or subpart of the story starts. And it's about a senior knight called Siskobar, who is also a childhood friend of Mlynar, just like bounty hunter Toland. Mlynar is known by only two people since his childhood. One of them is a bounty hunter Toland, and one of them is a senior campaign knight, Siskobar. This senior knight, he is a chivalrous person like Mlynar, and just like him, he also despises the system. In fact, he even had a wife, just like them, and the wife ended up speaking up against the Kazimier's government, and suddenly she was made to disappear and she was executed. And back when she was being executed, Mlynar had some power and was working under Casimir, so this knight asked Mlynar for help to put in a word with the law and save his wife, but Mlynar couldn't because that case was quite big. It had 13 convicts, and even Mlynar didn't have the power to save her. And so this knight doesn't exactly look up to Mlynar anymore. And at the same time, because of his hate against the nation and because of what happened to his wife, he ends up becoming a bit more extreme. He says that the knights here can no longer bring hope, they can no longer sacrifice themselves, they're just sold to the businessmen. Their weapon is an ornament to be used by the businessmen, which is the same thing that Mlynar agrees with. And they all know that the neighboring nation Lithuania is constantly preparing to go on war against Kazimirs. Meanwhile, Kazimirs are not prepared for war at all. All of their knights have gone wasted by the businessmen, and they all understand all of this. But Mlynar just has a different way of doing things, whereas Escobar, he ends up becoming a bit more extreme. In fact, the explosion that happened in the slums earlier was Escobar's doing, and Escobar is trying to kill the noble, so that way Lithuanian will be forced to go on war against Kazimierz way earlier. According to Escobar, war is the only way to wake up Kazimierz back to their previous glory, to make them true knights again. But Mlynar completely disagrees with this method. He says that war is not easy. The first people to be abandoned in war are the weak people who don't have any weapons, who can't protect themselves. And he asks Escobar if he will be able to shed the tears for all the deaths that will happen because of his decision. He tells him he chose wrong and that he shouldn't do it. There's still time to turn back, to not cause this war, to save himself, to not do this anymore. But Escobar doesn't agree. He says that the previous Mlynar from 20 years ago, who used to be a true knight, if he was here today, he would have also done the same thing. He would have gone on war against Casimir straight away. But Mlynar says that's not the case. That's giving up hope. You're getting obsessed. But Escobar continues on and he's trying to assassinate the noble. What happens is, because of the explosion, the noble is forced to drive back earlier, and Escobar has placed an ambush for the noble. So as soon as his car arrives, the noble will be killed, and then there will be a war. And so Mlynar is stopping him from doing that, but in the end he doesn't listen and keeps on dueling Mlynar until Mlynar slashes him, and Escobar falls down, and then Mlynar tries to persuade him still, but it turns out the slash was lethal and Escobar is about to die. And Mlynar just then is told by Escobar that Mlynar's brother and sister-in-law are outside in the Lithuanian, that Escobar saw them in Lithuanian in an encounter a few years ago. And Mlynar suddenly turns really serious and asks him if he shared it with someone else, but Escobar says that he didn't share the information with anyone else, and then he passes away, he dies, while Mlynar mourns over his death. Before this duel was about to happen, Mlynar was with Toland, the bounty hunter. These three were all childhood friends, and Toland knew what was up and that Escobar is going wrong, and the only result is that he's going to have to die. But Mlynar was not giving up on Escobar. He was saying, I want to talk to him and stop him. And Toland even mentioned that it's a bad habit in Mlynar to see the best in others and to hold on to hope even when there's no hope. But Mlynar still continues with his way. He tries to save Escobar, but he couldn't. In the end, Escobar had to die, and Mlynar mourns over his death. And then the story just ends basically with some small quote from Mlynar, which is like, all of us are wanderers, and if like a man is a wanderer, there's no point where he is or where he is going. All of his story is really great for me personally, except the last point, like where the person is going, we should all know where we are going. It's just that where we are right now, we might never know, and we are all wanderers. He's pretty much true about everything he does. So there we go, guys. That's my favorite character. I hope you enjoyed the video.